I don't need to agree with it, or I don't even need to be comfortable in it. I think quite the contrary. You just have to have confidence to do something.
For decades, John Travolta has been one of Hollywood's most enigmatic figures. Behind the dazzling smile and those iconic dance moves from Saturday Night Fever and Grease lies a man who's faced unimaginable tragedy, persistent rumors, and questions that have followed him for nearly 50 years. At 71, the actor's recent choices and rare moments of openness are painting a picture that many have long suspected, from his relationship with the Church of Scientology to the heartbreaking losses that changed everything. Travolta's life tells a story far more complex than what we see on screen. What's really been happening behind the scenes? The shifting relationship with Scientology. The whispers really started circulating after a high-profile gala in 2023. Tom Cruise arrived in the most Tom Cruise way possible, by helicopter, making an entrance that practically vibrated with theatrics. But the buzz that night wasn't about him. It was about who wasn't there. John Travolta, a man long viewed as one of Scientology's most recognizable ambassadors, was nowhere to be seen. And for people who follow the internal dynamics of the church, that absence set off alarms and raised questions that didn't fade quickly. Travolta's connection to Scientology goes all the way back to his early 20s. He joined when he was just 21, at a moment when his career hadn't yet taken shape. For decades, he credited the church with helping him find confidence and landing early career-defining roles. He seemed genuinely devoted. He and his late wife, Kelly Preston, were often viewed as the second most influential celebrity couple in the church after Tom Cruise. Their loyalty was rarely questioned, and for years, many assumed that would never change. But everything shifted after Preston died from breast cancer in 2020. When Travolta announced her passing, what stood out most to longtime observers wasn't what he said, it was what he didn't say. His message thanked the doctors, the nurses, the medical teams at well-known cancer centers, and the people who supported their family. But there was no mention of Scientology. None of the usual acknowledgments that had once been woven into his public statements. People noticed. It marked a subtle but meaningful change in tone, especially given Scientology's complicated history with medical treatment and the way its members typically frame personal hardships. From there, more signs began emerging. Friends and insiders quietly shared that Travolta seemed to be redefining his social life. In early 2025, he was spotted partying in Miami with director Randall Emmett, a figure surrounded by substance-related controversies. Nobody seriously believed Travolta was using anything himself, but for someone tied to an organization with strict anti-substance principles, choosing to spend time publicly with someone carrying that reputation signaled a shift. It suggested he was no longer shaping his entire life around what Scientology might approve, and that he was testing the boundaries of how much influence the church still held over his personal choices. His absence from the 2023 Scientology Gala only deepened the speculation. Travolta is a pilot. He could have flown himself there without blinking. Yet, he stayed away. A friend told the National Enquirer that his level of involvement had waned significantly since the deaths of both Kelly Preston and close friend Kirstie Alley, another devout Scientologist who died of cancer in 2022. The source added something revealing. Despite their devout following of Scientology, it tragically didn't save them, and that reality weighed on him more than anyone outside his inner circle realized. And the deeper you look into the timeline, the clearer it becomes that this change didn't come from a sudden revelation. It grew out of something far more personal, far more painful, and far more human. An evolution shaped by grief, shifting priorities, and the quiet recalibration of a man deciding what his life should look like moving forward. The tragedy, that changed everything. To understand how John Travolta's relationship with Scientology may have shifted over the years, you really have to start with the weight he's been carrying, a weight that never truly left him. And the center of that weight is the loss of his son, Jett, a tragedy that quietly reshaped every part of his life. On January 2nd, 2009, the Travolta family was spending the holidays in the Bahamas. For them, this wasn't a luxury trip. It was a routine getaway, the kind of peaceful family time they tried to protect from cameras and headlines. They rented their usual home, enjoyed the ocean air, and kept things relaxed. But all of that changed in a matter of moments. 16-year-old Jett, who had a long history of seizures, went into the bathroom that morning. At some point during those few minutes alone, he suffered a severe seizure. He collapsed, hit his head on a hard surface, and was found on the floor. What happened next was chaos blended with disbelief, the kind of panic that hits before your brain can catch up to the reality of what's unfolding. Travolta and Kelly rushed downstairs after being alerted by their nanny. A caretaker was already working desperately to revive Jett, performing chest compressions. Travolta tried to help with his son's breathing. Paramedics were called immediately, but despite everything everyone tried, nothing changed. By the time they reached the hospital, the doctors could only confirm what the family already feared. Jett was gone. Most parents who lose a child are given space to grieve. The Travoltas didn't get that luxury. Because of John's fame, everything became public almost instantly. Reporters swarmed, rumors spread. Unsympathetic commentary started appearing online within hours. They weren't just mourning privately, they were grieving while the world watched, dissected, and speculated. For years before this, the family had publicly described Jett's condition as related to Kawasaki disease, which he'd experienced as a toddler. But during the extortion trial that followed his death, Travolta acknowledged something he had never said openly: that his son lived with autism and a seizure disorder. It wasn't an attempt to hide the truth before, it was an attempt to protect a child who had already dealt with enough challenges. Jett's seizures had been a constant part of family life. They came every few days, often lasting under a minute, but powerful enough to drain him afterward. He would sleep for half the day once a seizure ended. Medication helped at one point, but doctors advised discontinuing it later. There was no simple solution, only constant management, constant worry, and a constant awareness that things could turn dangerous quickly. This context mattered, especially because critics had tried to connect Jett's medical issues to Scientology's controversial teachings about mental health. The real story was more complicated than the headlines suggested. The family relied on traditional doctors, tried treatments when they were recommended, and made decisions based on medical advice, not doctrine. But the public rarely cared about nuance. They cared about a narrative, and grief doesn't fit cleanly into one. The pain from losing Jett left a visible mark on Travolta. Friends have said he was shattered. He later expressed that he questioned how he was supposed to move forward at all. Scientology supporters stood close to the family throughout that time, offering structure and their version of emotional support. But even with that, nothing took away the feeling of waking up every day without his son. And the tragedy didn't just affect him emotionally, it altered the rhythm of his life. It changed the atmosphere in their home. It changed the way he thought about parenting his other children. And it changed how he approached work. Anyone who knew him noticed the shift. Conversations became quieter. His public appearances slowed down. Behind the polished interviews and red carpets, there was a man still trying to figure out what life looked like after the worst loss imaginable. What makes Jett's story even more heartbreaking is how many layers were tied to it. The medical complexities, the public scrutiny, the legal fallout, the pressure on the family from both the outside world and the church. Every part of it left a scar, and those scars shaped everything that would come next. And sadly, this wasn't the only devastating loss that forced Travolta to question the foundations of his life. The next heartbreak pushed him even further into unfamiliar territory, raising questions he never expected to face. Kelly Preston and the questions that followed. Kelly Preston passed away on July 12, 2020, at just 57 years old. She had spent 2 years fighting breast cancer, choosing to keep her diagnosis private. When the news finally became public, it stunned the world, not just because she was so young, but because she and John Travolta had always seemed like one of those rare Hollywood couples who found a way to build a real, grounded life together, despite the pressure around them. Their story started way back in 1987 on the set of The Experts. The movie itself didn't leave much of a mark, but their connection definitely did. At the time, Kelly was already well known, and John was in the middle of one of his career transitions, the period between Grease fame and his Pulp Fiction comeback. Friends who knew them said the two fell into an easy rhythm pretty quickly. They shared a similar sense of humor, a love for family, and a deep interest in creating a home that actually felt stable, something not always guaranteed in Hollywood. By 1991, they were married. Not just once, but twice, first in Paris, then again in Florida, to make sure everything was legal in the United States. Over the next 3 decades, they raised 3 children: Jett, Ella Blue, and later Benjamin. Through all the ups and downs, they seemed solid. They moved as a unit, supported each other's careers, and appeared genuinely happy in interviews and public moments. So when Kelly died, the silence around Scientology and John's announcement spoke loudly to people who'd been following their story for years. He thanked the medical teams at MD Anderson Cancer Center, emphasizing how grateful they were for the care she received. It was noticeable, maybe even intentional, that Scientology wasn't mentioned at all. And because the Travoltas had been so closely tied to the church for so long, this absence created its own questions. Former members of the church began suggesting something long whispered about, that Kelly may have been the heart of John's involvement. According to them, she had been the one who was more deeply committed to Scientology's programs and lifestyle. With her gone, some believed John's connection might naturally loosen. Whether that theory is completely accurate or not, people around him noticed changes. By 2024, sources were saying that Scientology didn't appear to be the center of his life in the way it had been in earlier years. They described him as more introspective, more protective of his emotional boundaries, and far more cautious when it came to opening up again. Around this time, there were small rumors about a possible interest in his cash-out co-star, Kristen Davis. Some insiders said his kids were supportive of him finding companionship again. Others insisted he wasn't ready, that the idea of being vulnerable after losing Kelly felt almost impossible. That word, vulnerable, came up again and again, and it makes sense. He wasn't just mourning a partner. He was mourning the only person who had shared the full weight of his public life, his family tragedies, and his private struggles. Adding to all of this were the long-running rumors that had followed Travolta for decades, especially around his sexuality. The church had often been involved in managing, minimizing, or shutting down these stories. Former Scientology executives later explained why acknowledging anything outside of what the church teaches would have been seen internally as evidence that their methods weren't effective. So for years, the organization reportedly stepped in whenever tabloids began circling. It wasn't just about protecting John. It was about protecting the church's public image. At the same time, the extortion attempt that followed Jett's death showed just how little control Travolta had over the most personal parts of his life. It made clear how quickly private information could be twisted into leverage by people with the wrong intentions. That experience, combined with decades of rumors and the constant scrutiny of his family life, meant that Kelly had often been the person who helped him navigate storms that outsiders never fully understood. For years, Kelly helped him weather storms like that. She understood the pressures, the rumors, the complicated relationship he had with his faith, and the weight of constantly being in the public eye. She'd been his partner not only in life, but in navigating Hollywood, navigating tragedy, and navigating the scrutiny that came with being John Travolta. Losing her meant losing the person who knew all the hidden layers behind the public version of him. Her death didn't just change his home life. It changed the infrastructure of support around him. According to those close to him, it also caused him to quietly rethink where he stands, with Scientology, with Hollywood, and with the version of himself he had tried to maintain for decades. And while he didn't say any of this out loud, you could see it in the choices he made afterward, in the things he stopped mentioning, and in the priorities that seemed to shift almost immediately. The grief he faced, the questions that followed, and the silence he kept all pointed to bigger changes that were unfolding long before the public caught on. And the more people looked back, the more they realized that Kelly's passing wasn't simply a heartbreaking moment. It was the beginning of a turning point that would eventually lead to even bigger signs of change in John Travolta's life. Living in the spotlight, hiding in plain sight. The extortion case that unfolded after Jett's death revealed just how exposed John Travolta really was when his life fell apart. Losing a child is already the kind of pain most people can barely comprehend. And yet Travolta had to navigate something even more surreal. Strangers trying to profit from one of the most devastating moments of his life. The accused included a paramedic and a former Bahamas senator, both charged with attempting to pressure Travolta into paying $25 million in exchange for keeping sensitive medical documents private. What made it even harder was the fact that the paramedic had initially been portrayed as someone who tried to help. Later, the story shifted into something much darker, showing how quickly compassion could turn into an opportunity for the wrong people. That trial exposed the uncomfortable truth that Travolta wasn't just grieving. He was also defending himself, his son's dignity, and his family's privacy. And according to former Scientologists who later spoke publicly, that feeling of vulnerability wasn't only external. Some suggested that the church held a kind of psychological influence over him simply because they had access to years of deeply personal auditing sessions. Whether or not anything was ever used against him, the idea added another layer to a life already shaped by intense scrutiny. This is one of the reasons Travolta has always been so guarded about his private life. Over the years, accusations and lawsuits appeared from people claiming they'd had relationships with him. The stories were denied, fought in court, or disappeared quietly. In Hollywood circles, speculation floated for decades, sometimes resurfacing when he took on a new role or when paparazzi captured an unflattering photo. And yet Travolta never explained anything, never fed the rumor mill, and never allowed the noise to pull him into a public debate about his own identity. His marriage to Kelly Preston helped anchor that privacy. People close to them described a partnership that really worked. Shared goals, shared interests, and a willingness to do the emotional labor most relationships require behind the scenes. They raised 3 children together, leaned on counseling when necessary, and presented a united front despite the storms swirling around them. For Travolta, Kelly wasn't just a spouse. She was the person who steadied him during the moments when fame felt more like a burden than a blessing. After she passed away, the shift in Travolta was noticeable, even without him explaining it. His social media became sparse and soft, mostly centered around his children, his small joys, and the quiet routines that replaced the busier chapters of his life. Friends hinted that his home life changed significantly. The house that once hosted large celebrations became quieter. He spent more time flying his planes, taking short trips to decompress, and creating a rhythm that allowed him and his youngest son, Benjamin, to adapt to their new reality. Professionally, Travolta didn't disappear, but the pace slowed. He continued working, mostly choosing projects that didn't demand the kind of intensity he once thrived on. Films like Cash Out in 2024 and a few smaller thrillers kept him engaged without overwhelming him. Those sets were known to be relaxed, allowing him space to focus on family first and work second. He also embraced nostalgia more openly than before. That Grease sing-along appearance in June 2024, complete with the Danny Zuko hair and outfit, wasn't just a fun pop culture moment. It was a sign that Travolta still found comfort in the roles that introduced him to the world. Revisiting them seemed to give him a sense of connection to the younger, happier version of himself. At home, things were even more grounded. He spent more time cooking, something he reportedly picked up again after Kelly passed away. Friends said he enjoyed simple routines, taking Benjamin skiing, watching Ella record music, and spending time with close friends outside the industry. His home in Ocala became more of a real refuge than ever. The private runway on his property, once a symbol of luxury, became a way for him to escape to quiet places with his kids without drawing attention. Work didn't stop, though. Travolta appeared at conventions, met fans, and signed autographs. These events weren't massive movie premieres. They were smaller gatherings where he could genuinely connect with people who'd followed his career since the 70s. And many noticed that he seemed more approachable than he had been in years. The tension that hovered around him in earlier eras seemed to have lifted a little. Loss does that sometimes. It strips away anything that doesn't matter and leaves a person leaning into whatever feels simple, real, and safe. There was also talk about him writing a memoir. Industry insiders said he had begun gathering stories and reflecting on major turning points in his life, but hadn't decided whether to actually publish anything. The hesitation made sense. A memoir would mean addressing pieces of his past he spent decades avoiding. The rumors, the tragedies, the complicated relationship with Scientology, and the shifting identity that followed. Some believe he may eventually share his version of the story, while others think he'll keep most of it to himself forever. And layered over everything was the question of Scientology. He never publicly criticized the church. He never confirmed stepping away. But the absences, the silence, and the way he chose to build his world after Jett and Kelly's deaths spoke louder than any official statement. His life simply began revolving around different priorities: Benjamin, Ella, quiet work, emotional healing, and maintaining a sense of balance he seemed to have fought for years to find. Where all of this leaves Travolta now is the question that lingers. And it's a question that becomes even more intriguing once you look at how he's living today, at 71, with the world watching closely to see what comes next. John finally reveals the truth. At 71 years old, John Travolta seems to be navigating his life with more intention and independence than ever before. He hasn't made any bold public declaration about stepping away from Scientology, and realistically, he probably never will. That's not his style. Massive celebrity exits from the church usually erupt into headlines and carefully crafted statements, but Travolta has always been the opposite of that. Even at the height of his involvement, he kept things quiet. His spiritual life lived in its own lane, separate from the public image built around his films, his career milestones, and his personal tragedies. But if you look closely at the choices he's made in the last few years, you can see a steady shift, almost like someone slowly redistributing their emotional weight toward their children, their peace, own sense of what feels right. This transition hasn't been sudden. It's unfolded gradually, in small decisions that only make sense when viewed together. He still works in Hollywood, but the energy behind his projects feels different. In films like Cash Out in 2024, he wasn't chasing a comeback or trying to reinvent himself. He was simply doing something he enjoyed. Travolta has reached a point where his career isn't about proving anything. He's no longer the young actor fighting to be taken seriously, nor the comeback star riding the momentum of Pulp Fiction. He's someone picking roles because they seem fun or interesting, or because they fit into a lifestyle he's built around stability. He also still embraces the nostalgia that surrounds his most iconic roles, but in a healthier way. When he showed up at the Grease sing-along event at the Hollywood Bowl in June 2024, it wasn't about reliving the past or clinging to it. It felt more like a nod of appreciation, a way of saying that he can celebrate where he came from without being trapped by it. That brief return to the Danny Zuko look said a lot about where he is emotionally. He can laugh at the old days, enjoy the memories, and then go home to the quiet life he's built. It's a balance he didn't always have. And the audience response that night, which was overwhelmingly warm, only reinforced that he still has a place in the hearts of fans without needing to perform at the pace he once did. Career moments, though, aren't the center of his world anymore. His priority is clearly his children. Ella Blue and Benjamin are the people who shape most of his decisions now. Ella has stepped comfortably into her own path. She released her first EP, Colors of Love, in November 2024, and the project felt deeply personal, especially the song Little Bird, which honored her mother. Travolta supported her at every step, not in an overbearing Hollywood parent way, but as someone genuinely thrilled to see her find her artistic voice. He promotes her music, celebrates her milestones, and lets her shine without inserting himself into the spotlight. And when she performs live, he often quietly stands off to the side, letting her take ownership of the stage, which says more about his growth than any public statement ever could. Then there's Benjamin, who is growing up in a very different environment from his older siblings. The Travolta family today is smaller, closer, and more inward-focused. Travolta posts little moments, from skiing to cooking to traveling, and each one shows a father who is truly enjoying watching his son grow. After losing Jett and Kelly, these everyday moments carry a weight they never did before. Travolta has talked about the conversations he has with Benjamin about aging, grief, and love. The kind of talks that show how profoundly he's changed since his younger years. There's a softness there, a patience that wasn't always visible before. And friends close to him have noted that he's more rooted in family traditions now, more intentional about routines, and more invested in creating a safe, steady world for Benjamin as he enters his teenage years. When you put all these pieces together, the truth that people sensed for so long becomes clearer. It's not a shocking secret. It's not a dramatic confession. It's a gradual realization that Travolta's relationship with Scientology, fame, and the demands of his past seems to have evolved. The deaths of Jett and Kelly shook the foundation of his life more deeply than most people understood. It's not surprising that his connection to the church might shift after losing two of the people who meant the most to him. The absence of Scientology from certain moments, especially during crises, has been noticed by many. But Travolta has handled it in the same way he handles most things, privately. His choices over the past few years point towards someone who is redefining what his future should look like. His absence from that major Scientology gala, his willingness to socialize with people outside the church's inner circle, and the growing silence around the church during the hardest moments of his life all signal a subtle change. It's not rejection, it's reorientation. Travolta isn't erasing his past. He's choosing what parts of it he wants to carry forward. The truth is that leaving the church, even quietly, would be incredibly difficult for someone with almost 50 years of involvement. Former Scientologists have often talked about how complicated that process is emotionally, socially, and financially. But distance doesn't always mean departure. Sometimes it shows up in behavior, in the relationships someone chooses to nurture, in the events they skip, and in the topics they stop addressing in interviews. Travolta has made several choices that point to a man creating space. Space to breathe, to parent freely, to grieve in his own way, and to shape a life that's more aligned with who he is now. He appears far more comfortable in his 70s than he did in earlier decades. He doesn't chase narratives anymore. He doesn't react to rumors. He doesn't try to correct speculation. He simply lets things be, allowing curiosity to exist without feeding it. That alone signals a major shift. For someone who spent years navigating scrutiny, from tabloids, from the church, from Hollywood, this quieter independence seems to be a kind of peace he hadn't fully experienced before. It's reflected in his work, too. He chooses projects that interest him, not projects strategically designed to bolster a certain image. He engages with fans when he wants to, especially when it involves nostalgia or support for his children. But he also retreats when he needs to. His life isn't built around celebrity anymore. It's built around connection, what remains of his family, the memories of the people he lost, and the life he wants for his children. And now, at this stage of his life, every choice he makes seems to hint at where he's heading next. The slow shift away from the constraints of his old world, the deliberate focus on his kids, the openness to new people and new experiences, the gentle detachment from the pressure to maintain a certain image. These are all signs of someone rewriting their story, not in a loud or public way, but in the quiet space of private decisions. What comes next for Travolta is what people are watching most closely. Because the changes he's making now, small as they may seem, could lead to something even more unexpected. What are your thoughts about John Travolta? Does this revelation change how you see him? Share with us in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. While you're still here, check out the next video that pops up on your screen.